Good morning, everyone. The Finance and Investment Cell of Shri Ram College of Commerce welcomes you to today's session of Shri Ram Financial Forum. We're honored to have amongst us our guest of honor, Ambassador Lakshmi Puri. Welcome, ma'am.
Pleasure to be here.
Ambassador Lakshmi Puri is the former Assistant Secretary General at the United Nations and the former Deputy Executive Director of UN Women. She was the director of the flagship International Trade Division and the acting Deputy Secretary General of United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. She led the preparations for the fourth Least Developed Countries Conference as the director at OHRLLS. Before her 15-year stint at the United Nations, she served as an Indian diplomat for 28 years. She joined the Indian Foreign Service in 1974 and served in Japan, Sri Lanka, Switzerland, and as an ambassador to Hungary and accredited to Bosnia and Herzegovina. She was active in conceptualizing and negotiating India's many bilateral, plurilateral, and multilateral economic diplomacy initiatives. Joining the leadership team of UN Women at its inception, she contributed strategically and vitally in building UN Women into a dynamic entity, a powerful advocate, knowledge and partnership hub, norm center, and program driver for gender equality and women's empowerment. She was instrumental in convening by UN Women of the first ever global Summit on Gender Equality in 2015 with 70 key heads of state and governments attending and making commitments. She also led imaginative movement building campaigns such as He for She and Planet 50/50 with global impact. She has received international awards and accolades for her work and contribution to the international development, like human rights, humanitarian peace and security policy making, and norm setting. These include the prestigious Eleanor Roosevelt Human Rights Award, Novus Award for championing the Sustainable Development Goals, the Millennium Campus Awards 2015, and Global Generation Award as inspiration for youth. Ma'am has achieved so much that her list of accolades never ends. I would now like to invite our faculty advisor of FIC, Ms. Saroj Joshi, to welcome everyone.
Thank you, Vidya. Good afternoon, everyone. I, Saroj Joshi, on behalf of Finance and Investment Cell SRCC, welcome you all for today's session. It is giving me immense pleasure to have Madam Lakshmi Puri, the esteemed speaker of the day, amongst us. Thank you so much, ma'am, for sparing your valuable time for SRCC. It is indeed a matter of pride to have you amongst us, ma'am. We all are looking forward to listen to you. So I now request you to kindly take over the session and enlighten us with your thoughts. We welcome you, ma'am. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Indeed, it's a very great pleasure to go back in time in a way to interact with the Delhi University, from which I graduated many, many years ago.
Okay.
And it's also a pleasure to interact with the SRCC, Shri Ram College of Commerce, the young men and women on International Youth Day, on what one can call an existential topic for both youth and for India. And that topic you have chosen, economic challenges and opportunities for youth in the post-COVID-19 future. So I want to begin by saying that this is perhaps the most significant creative destruction moment in the history of the 21st century. And it is not only so in the comprehensive sense of Shiva's cosmic dance, but it is also in the Schumpeterian sense of economic processes, products, and entire systems and sectors undergoing destruction and recreation. So this is a moment of tremendous challenges, true, but it's also a moment of great opportunity for growing the economic pie as much as for distributing it, the social, also the distributive justice aspect of it. So I also want to say that youth need not be the victims of COVID-19 related economic disruption and destruction, which is often the stereotype that has been painted, and much of it is also true. But they have an opportunity to be the agents of positive transformation of the economy and become masters of creation in a post-pandemic economic future. Now, who better to make the most of this creative destruction moment than youth? Not me, but youth. Symbol of resilience, vibrancy, rebirth, building anew. And you symbolize the power of transformation, vitality, energy, and hope. And India has to rise and be economically reborn on the confidence of young men and women. And this is especially so because India is blessed or has the unique distinction of the largest youth population and largest share of youth population in the world. Of 40% between the ages of 15 to 29 million, that is over 500 million, and as of now, and 66% under 35 years of age. So over 800 million. So you can imagine the youth power that we have, the potential of, and the power of possibility that lies therein. And then there is this tremendous potential of reaping, first of all, of harnessing the human resources potential of young men and women of India, but also reaping the demographic dividend if we keep this youth advantage. And we also, and there is the other part of it, we also keep having a declining fertility rates, okay? And gender equality. So these are the two bases on which, or two drivers for achieving the demographic dividend. But of course, it will not happen on its own, and it will require strategic investments in the human capital of young women and men as they enter and stay in the labor force. And I want to emphasize that. In their empowerment, productivity, entrepreneurship, and innovation that will drive India's exponential economic growth, an ambition of a $5 trillion economy by 2024-25. And of course, that ambition, as you know, has been clouded by COVID-19 stresses, but we hope that we can overcome that, provided we get our youth strategies right and we implement them. On the other side, the downside of not realizing youth potential is that we can get a volcano of unmet expectations in jobs and economic and social welfare waiting to erupt, with attendant negative consequences of political stability, security, and social justice and harmony, poverty eradication, and sustainable development for all. So we need to make sure that we actually are able to realize the demographic dividend. Now, youth empowerment should be the means to, and be also the objective of the economic recreation that is and should be happening in India and the world through three seamless economic processes in the post-COVID context or in the COVID response context as well. The first is relief and mitigation. The second is revival and resilience. And the third is recreation and rebuilding and reinvention. So, Atmanirbhar Bharat of Prime Minister Modi and upgraded and scaled up Sabka Vikas, Sabka Saath, Sabka Vishwas schemes of Prime Minister Modi provide a means to do much of that. And his new India seems to be built on the aspirations, motivations, talent, skill, and commitment of young India. Now, young India has to also, of course, rise to challenges and opportunities and not just be passive beneficiaries or labhartis of government, private sector, and civil society largesse, but become active in enabling, and this is a very important point, in enabling the uptake and delivery of their programs for youth, by youth and of youth. So you have to own that and you have to drive that. You have to invest in that yourself as youth. So this is something that is really important. The other aspect is that we will always emphasize, and I've always emphasized, is that your voice, participation, and leadership and your agency in your own empowerment and in India's economic renaissance is an imperative. Without youth power, we will not reach any of our goals. And you must be true sustainable development agents and transformers. Economic growth, social equity, and environmental protection, all these three goals, you must be the agents of delivering on them and actors. Now, what are the unique challenges and opportunities for what is often referred to now, including by ILO, as the lockdown generation of youth? And that applies to India as well, in fact, in a major way. So it has created, the pandemic has created unique socio-economic and cultural crisis, psychological crisis for youth, and it has deepened, as in other areas, deepened pre-existing fault lines. And the ILO has referred to the risk of a lockdown generation due to COVID-19 triggered socio-economic challenges. And I call them, these challenges, I call them 5 shocks or panch aghat, okay? So the first aghat is the health and humanitarian disaster shock. Although youth themselves have been less infected by and grievously made ill by COVID-19 itself, their health has been their sexual and reproductive health, their mental health, their other health needs like other communicable diseases and non-communicable diseases, their health has been compromised. And it has been differentially so. And then, as the migrant workers crisis has shown, they have suffered a huge humanitarian crisis as well. And as frontline workers, youth have sacrificed their lives. As doctors and nurses and lab technicians and health and sanitation workers and police and armed forces. So youth has has suffered a major shock in terms of health and humanitarian disaster. The second aghat is education and skills shock. So as we know, education has been disrupted, and this has hit disadvantaged students most. And now the digital gap is exacerbating the gender and economic deprivation-based literacy, numeracy, school, higher education, vocational and skills gap of youth and among youth. Then there is the ICT connectivity and ICT infrastructure gap, which is then also producing its own inequalities because of the online and distance learning being resorted to as an interim measure, but also which may become a more permanent feature. That may be the new normal, maybe in combination with in-class teaching, but it has disadvantaged the poor, the urban, rural, poor, and those living in remote areas and those kind of disadvantaged population cohorts, and certainly women and girls. As you know, internet access is in India has risen from a low 17%, but it is still 50%. So 50% of our population does not have internet access. Then there is this phenomenon of NEET. I'm sure you all know this. The value chain of quality education, skills, employment has been disrupted on both the demand and supply side, creating a lifelong education to employability disconnect and an earnings penalty. Again, this is something what the ILO has called, and OECD has also referred to it, that it is an earnings penalty for youth forced to quit studies at this time. Now, the NEET, that is not in education, employment, and training phenomenon has become widespread, including in India. Now, the third aghat is the employment and income shock. These are all interrelated blows that youth have had to bear. Firstly, as we know, apart from the educational disruption, we also have the disruption, collapse of industries and disruptions in supply chains, especially in youth-intensive, youth-employing, hard-hit sectors, businesses, and startups like travel, leisure, transport, textile and garment, construction, retail, hospitality, food, culture and media. These have all generated a wave of job losses, and youth are in the forefront of that loss. And CMIE estimates that Indian youth job losses are at 41%, up from 17% in 2018-2019. So you can see how much of an impact this crisis has had. So what does this mean? It means reduced earnings, it means less disposable incomes and quality employment, more poverty, and undermined human rights of youth at work. 75% of young workers are in informal, precarious jobs anyway, and many of them are self-employed, vendors and hawkers and so on. So all of them get affected and are the first to lose these informal, precarious jobs. And they have no social protection to fall back of their own. So that's why state has had to come forward. Then there is the other aspect of the prospect of, and I hope it will not come true, but our youth may have to not only bear up with high underemployment and unemployment rates, but may have to contend with, again, what ILO calls the scarring effects of protracted unemployment. So this is something that is going to be a major, major shock for youth as for the Indian economy. And then, if you look at the composition of the so-called working poor, youth predominate that. And they are most vulnerable, therefore, to the economic crisis. They are also most affected by redundancies and layoffs, with pink slips usually given to those who last joined the enterprise. And of course, there are so many other cascading impacts. Then you have the young migrant labor that moved precipitately in millions to their home states. They now face economic challenges on both ends. And as economists, you will know that they also pose a major labor dislocation and skills atrophy risk to the Indian economy. Now, and I want to also focus on this particular aspect because international young migrant workers, India has been a major exporter of labor to major markets like Gulf, US, Europe, etc. Now, they have had COVID-19 has resulted in their returning in at least over 1 million have returned. They have skills, but they will have difficulty finding work, re-entering and transitioning to better quality jobs in a shrinking job market or launching or sustaining new enterprises. Then we have the fourth aghat or shock, the technology future shock. Acceleration and fast forwarding of the 4.0 and digitization revolutions are bound to affect India and youth as these impact socially and economically the youth's ability to learn, live, work, and socialize. These 10 trends that I want to highlight, technology trends, include, of course, you all know them, 5G and ICT driven fast, affordable access to internet, AI and machine learning, robotics and drones, 3D printing, supply chain 4.0, Internet of Things, big data, cloud computing, and telehealth and telemedicine, digital work, learning, payments, shopping, and retail. So these mega trends now have got accelerated and fast-tracked into the future, from the future into now. So we are really suffering a technology future shock. And that has resulted, of course, in job destruction of all collar jobs for youth, and more that than job creation for them. And then also this whole question of, and so human labor, human work, and delivery of that work through physical presence has got devalued. And that has implications for youth. The fifth shock is the social, cultural, and psychological shock. And young men and women have become the poster children of the social inequality pandemic, which Secretary General of the UN has referred to, and it is made worse by the COVID-19 pandemic. The first aspect of this shock is the intersectionality. Young people, men and women, girls and boys, face multiple and intersecting disadvantages on account of their multidimensional poverty, class, religion, caste, rural, urban, migrant status, disability, and other inequalities and vulnerabilities. So we need to address all of these together, and that is also the reason why the pandemic hits them more. Also that there is a differential effect And we need to take these intersectionalities into account when we respond to the crisis and use youth power to emerge stronger. Also, there is the psychological part: fear, uncertainty, violence. Domestic violence has increased, conflict, insecurity, living in cramped conditions. Most young people don't have the luxury of large homes, and where, you know, they are not into each other's spaces. They have nowhere to go out. So all of that are causing mental health issues and upending of social and cultural norms. And a re-looking into behavior. I think I'll come to the behavior part a little later, but right now, I think I just want to flag this. So how do we insulate our youth from the negative impacts of those panchaghat or 5 shocks? How do we ensure that we turn these challenges into opportunities to build our post-COVID future better and not render it a lockout generation, but make it a resilient generation? So I propose the Pancha Tattvas, or 5 elements or absolute truths of youth empowerment for a new, sustainable and prosperous, equity-based and SDG-based dynamic and economic future for India. So the first Tattva is youth power, transformed health sector and disaster response. Now, the countries and India is bound to overhaul, expand, and scale up investment in the health, medical, and pharmaceutical sector. That can become a major force multiplier for youth empowerment and employment. Similarly, the universal access to health, SDG 3 goal, if we can work on Ayushman Bharat-led universal health insurance, will enable universal access of youth to quality healthcare services. And again, this could be their empowerment and employment multiplier. The other areas are, of course, I think it's very, very important for youth to participate. And this I want to really emphasize. This is a big opportunity. Participate in grassroots health institutions and ramping up health and wellness centers in rural areas. And one of my good friends, is Bindu Dalmia, uses this term to indicate rural, urban, peri-urban, you know, all the areas together as an integral unit, as also in delivery and uptake of sexual and reproductive health and rights and family planning programs. I think youth have to really get involved in on all of these areas, because they can be real transformers in this area. Also, in the revamped youth inclusive and youth-led disaster risk reduction and response infrastructure and services opens up new employment and entrepreneurship doors to youth. And I have, of course, witnessed how youth have been in the forefront, as I already said, in all these disaster rescue and response activities, not only in the COVID case, but floods, earthquakes. They are out there, you know, providing, supporting and responding. The second tattva is youth empowering education revolution and skills revolution. And we really need a skills revolution. How did, I know China is now being talked about in a different vein, but I think we do need to learn some of their lessons. how they built up a youth skills hub and reservoir for the world. That was the strength for their attracting. It was not only cheap labor, but it was skilled labor, and labor that is then trainable and upskillable and reskillable. So we really need to make that one of the key aspects of Atmanirbhar Bharat, and Prime Minister Modi has in fact emphasized this. So also under the how do we overcome some of the shocks that I mentioned? How do we bridge the digi education gap and distance education gap that has come up because of the digital gap that we suffer? So on that, I think Prime Minister Modi has taken, and his government has taken, a number of steps: Swayam Prabha, DTH and private channels, interactive lessons through Skype, e-Pathshala strengthening, PM Vidya program for multimode access to digi education, use of community radio and iPodcasts. So these are enabling distance education for those lacking internet access or infrastructure. But also simultaneously that infrastructure has to grow, made more affordable, accessible. Also there is very important that 100 universities are starting online courses. I'm sure Delhi University is amongst them, and teachers upskilling and reskilling for digitized form of teaching is also being undertaken, but will need to be accelerated because one can't just move seamlessly from classroom teaching to online teaching, as many of us are discovering, by the way, when we interact on these webinars with audiences and you know, want that connect, that adrenaline that comes when you connect in person. Democratization of education tool. So we will need to use distance learning and online learning as a democratization of education tool and complementary to in-class learning. We have to be careful that online learning is not a substitute. Then the new national education policy. It can be a major enabler for making youth, as PM Modi said, future ready. But to ensure universal access to education for all and SDG 4 realization, but also to develop 21st century skills, creativity, STEM talent, vocational training and skills, and employability in both old and new sectors and jobs. Then we also have quality and updated education as a silver bullet for maximizing potential of youth as our most precious human capital. And they must be, of course, a part of the new teaching and training workforce. This NEP, as I think Prime Minister also in his message on the NEP, highlighted the importance of teachers and trainers being trained and also learning and being, again, made future ready in terms of what the new education policy demands. For youth, actually, this is another area for exponential employment opportunity. And Atmanirbhar youth benefiting from excellence in education is a mission possible. And also contributing to that is not only possible, but of course, very much must happen. The third tattva is youth empowerment through a jobs bonanza we need to also, of course, use Atmanirbhar Bharat for targeted and specific initiatives at central and state levels for mitigation, economic rebuilding, and renewal measures that provide relief, social protection, and livelihood to youth, especially to those below poverty line in the interim, while generating, and I want to say that there has to be a difference between the interim relief and what is going to be sustainable in terms of stimulating and generating decent jobs and entrepreneurship opportunities for youth in the longer run. So, and that must be implemented effectively and urgently. And I don't need to go through all the different schemes that I hope as young people who are also studying economics, but otherwise also are aware, and that's the space that you are going to be in. I'm sure you know all of them. So I won't go through all the different programs that are in place for that, but I want to say that it's important to build ecosystem with private-public partnerships, scaled up financial investment, and fostering industry demand-driven scaling, upscaling and reskilling. This is very important, the industry linkage, because you have then graduates coming out, but they have no link to the demand, industry demand that is there. And so there is a disconnect between the skills available and skills needed. So I think that really has to be a major shift, and it can have a major impact in creating jobs, export sector participation in trade related industries, and participation and entrepreneurship, MSMEs, but also big entrepreneurship, and short and medium term, both in the short and medium term for youth from all socio-economic cohorts. And then I want to emphasize local development, which is what Atmanirbhar Bharat also does. And I think we have learned this lesson through COVID-19, that it's very, very important to have local and be vocal for local. And deploying scaled up financial, technological, and entrepreneurial resources for sustainable local development is youth empowering. Then the youth don't have to, migrate the youth exodus in an unplanned rural-urban exodus, interstate exodus can be prevented, and their potential used locally. And local to national and national to global supply chains in agriculture, manufacturing, services, while building on interstate complementarities is a necessary part of generating decent local employment for youth. The fourth tattva is technology adoption by youth for future readiness. Government, private sector, and civil society can work together to create a critical mass of high standard youth skills needed to garner the high quality tech, white collar jobs, industries, and also gray, white collar high tech jobs, but also gray and new collar jobs generated over the next 3 years in India and globally. All sectors can be led by youth. You have a propensity to absorb new technologies. You are technology hungry as young people. So you are best suited to really lead in this area. So, and to master also the tectonic digital shifts and digital shifts impacting economic processes and outcomes, and transforming agriculture, manufacturing, and services supply chains. And then, we are in a situation, either we as India, Indian youth and India will have to either be skill ready and equipped. And also, I think it's a mental shift as well to adapt and master these technologies or perish in the jobs, prosperity, and innovation race. So we have to leverage youth power strategically for this purpose. Then, of course, as I already said, Digital India, Skill India, high-tech infrastructure, human capital, all these projects, and to make India once again, but more than before ever, an R&D platform for the world. And that's where not only jobs are, but economic profit is and development is. The fifth tattva is youth empowering social and cultural revolution. And here I want to highlight, of course, the schemes that are for addressing social justice issues, poverty eradication, multidimensional poverty issues with vigor, from affordable housing for youth, employment, education, WASH agenda, Swachh Bharat agenda, cooking gas provision, the whole band of pro-poor, anti-poverty measures. I think youth have to be part of both uptaking this and helping others to uptake, but also delivering this. And then you have the social protection revolution for Samajik Nyay, which is a must. And it should be led by you, and also knit together all the schemes and see how youth can be supported. We have a major social services gap in India. You know, we came through that. It came to me when I was seeing all these migrants moving. And there was one case of a little girl whose parents died and who was left on the road. And we were thinking, what services are available for abandoned children or whose parents die, for orphans like her? That, you know, so it just set many of us thinking that whether it is shelters for the homeless, orphans, street children, to elderly and child care and protection services, to domestic violence against women and girls response services, there is a dire shortage of these services. So how do we get youth to take a lead on filling this gap? Not only for society, but for themselves as their economic empowerment and social empowerment leverage. So these services in India are direly needed. So it's a big untapped area for youth employment and social entrepreneurship. And look, there is a double barrel, if not a triple barrel advantage: economic empowerment and social impact, and using frontier technologies to find innovative solutions to some of these social issues, and response mechanisms, how to make them more effective and transparent, because there are always these issues of transparency, governance of these institutions. So youth are well placed to do that. I also want to emphasize the importance of a well-organized care economy. I think one of the COVID, one of the areas of COVID, I think self-realization that has come to us is that the importance of the care economy, which may remain largely digitization proof, by the way. Human beings will still have to be there to provide care. So hence both youth, both men and women can benefit from its development as an organized economic sector with social value. So I want to encourage the development of that social entrepreneurship in youth and by youth. Also, I would propose what I call a youth empowerment compact for sustainable development between our youth and government, private sector and civil society in activating these 5 tattvas. Then we have, of course, a few to-dos and musts. On their part, of course, governments must apply the youth and intergenerational lens to all policies, programs, and economic activities and economic recreation, reinvention efforts and projects. Also, they must update the youth strategies in a way that takes into account the post-COVID-19 response and recreation efforts and plans, and the youth place in those plans. Also, we need dedicated youth-focused institutions and programs. Some of them are already there, but we need to have the participation and leadership of youth in those programs and institutions, and also in the formulation and implementation of transversal national programs and leadership of youth in politics and governance, increased participation and leadership of youth. Also, young people's voice participation, leadership, and their mobilization and movement building for economic renaissance and social norm and behavior change. And I want to emphasize this. The young people who are going to change behaviors on inequality, whether it is gender inequality, whether it is caste-based, religion-based, any other inequalities, rural, urban, all of these inequalities, we need to have behavior change that youth must drive, including also, of course, behavior change in terms of swachhata. Behavior change, I think COVID-19 has brought out the WASH agenda very clearly, the water, sanitation and hygiene agenda, and youth can be in the forefront of that. So movement building for economic renaissance and social norm and behavior change. So I'm sorry I've taken up a long time, but I want to end by recalling some exhortations to youth from Swami Vivekananda on this day and at this juncture. The first of them is the one where he says, take risks in your life. If you win, you can lead. If you lose, you can guide. So this is a time to take risks by youth and for youth. Also, all powers in the universe are already ours. It is we who have put our hands before our eyes and cry that it is dark. So we may think that it is dark, but actually all the powers in the universe are already ours. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for such an insightful session. Ma'am, we asked a few questions from the participants, and most of them regarding the youth and COVID-19 has been covered by you in detail. And we have a couple of questions that we wish to ask you. So the first is, so ma'am, during the pandemic, women have been one of the most vulnerable section of the society. Apart from the loss in employment, there are also increased cases of domestic violence. So ma'am, what can the government and other institutions do to empower these women at such time?
Mm-hmm. So like youth, women also face the issues of intersectionality. So those who are disadvantaged by class, poverty, remoteness, location, rural, urban slums, then, caste. So all of these intersectionalities affect, redouble and compound the discrimination they face and the impact of COVID-19 crisis on them, from health to employment to income and hunger, the whole lot. So we need to, I have set out, I don't know, I'll draw your attention to an article that I wrote for the Hindustan Times, and which appeared, I think, 2 days ago on Sunday. It's available online, where I have talked about 7 chakras of transformation, gender equality transformation, and what we should do. And I have addressed these 7 chakras in terms of, first of all, like for youth, health and disaster response, education, then economy, society, and mindset change, all of that. And I've also highlighted issues that are normative change, laws, policies, measures. Now, let me come to the specific 2 issues you raised about women: employment and domestic violence. So yes, in fact, there has been something like 33% increase in domestic violence during this period. And this, of course, nothing can be excused, but the fact that the abuser is in the home and is not going out for work often creates even greater opportunity for him to oppress and be violent and abuse women and girls who are trapped at home with their abuser. So this is something that we have been advocating, that the domestic violence response services should be seen as essential service and should be available through any pandemic, any crisis, like any other major. It's a health emergency, it's an emotional emergency, but it's also a life-threatening one in many cases. So we have to be very, very clear in prioritizing domestic violence response and those who work for this. And I hope, I would also like to say youth should be more engaged in this sector, as I already said, as one of the social entrepreneurship sectors. The other is loss of employment. And all of the factors that I've mentioned are also applicable to women and girls. The NEET concept, phenomenon, is really applicable to women. Girls are not being able to access digital education, online education, so that disruption is there. But also it affects their skilling and vocational training, all of that. So they are not in employment, they are not in education, they are not in employment, they are not in training. And girls are most badly affected. In fact, if you look at the figures for NEET globally even, it's quite revealing that young women are, let me give you the, 30% for young women and 13% for young men. So this is this disparity apart. We need to address this whole issue, and therefore the value chain of education, skills, and employment, decent work, has to be kept up. There are, of course, some positives due to online work that women have benefited from, and that benefit comes from the fact that typically women have sought to work from home and demanded flexible working hours, preferred flexible working hours, and it was stigmatized as something that, oh, women who are not the A-team workers, they are the type who ask for this facility. But now that stigma hopefully with online working will go, that most women who also are in the childbearing age and who fall out of the organized labor force and pay what is called the motherhood penalty will probably be able to now work online and stay on their jobs, retain their jobs, be able to re-enter at will, and also be promoted. So, I mean, that what we call the leaking pipeline will be the leak will be stopped. So these are some of the aspects, but of course, women, once we make them a central part of the skilling revolution in India, then we make a big leap, including in the area of technology and digitized work.
Thank you, ma'am, for your answer. The last question is, you talked about sustainable development goals. So one of them is removing inequality from the society. You talked about gender inequality, but also what we have seen during this pandemic is income inequality increasing. The rich are flourishing while the middle and lower income groups are suffering from the pandemic. So, ma'am, what do you think the world governments can do to work towards this inequality?
Indeed, as you
Equality are flourishing while
said, and as I said earlier in quoting Secretary General of UN, that we are actually suffering from two pandemics, one made worse by the other, and that's the pandemic of social inequalities. And indeed, as I've said before, the way to go is to address this together in their interconnectedness and taking special measures, taking both targeted measures and special measures, but also mainstreaming the concerns and needs of those left behind in whatever we do to not only get out of this crisis, but also to rebuild a more equal society and economy, most importantly.
Okay, thank you so much, ma'am, for all the insights that you've provided us with today. So as the session draws to an end, I, on behalf of the Finance and Investment Cell of SRCC, would like to extend my heartfelt gratitude to Ambassador Lakshmi Puri, who took out time from her busy schedule to share her insights with us. I would also like to thank Ms. Saroj Joshi for all her support, professors of SRCC, and all in attendance for today's session. Thank you for making this session such a success. I would like to invite Ms. Saroj Joshi for a vote of thanks.
Yeah. Thank you, Vidya. Thank you so much, ma'am, for such an insightful and a wonderful session. It was really nice to listen to your views on this very important and a relevant topic of economic opportunities and challenges for young India in post-COVID era. And I think I would like to thank you personally for covering those 5 shocks which youth are facing, as well as discussing the Panch Tattvas for overcoming these shocks. I think we all have benefited a lot from your insights on the topic. Thank you for being with us, ma'am. I would also like to thank the FIC team for organizing this session. Thank you to all the participants for being with us. Thank you, everyone. Goodbye. Have a good day.
Thank you very much.